I got the call from John in the morning. My mother was sitting in the living room with JJ lying in her lap, fast asleep. I heard her crying all night. I told my mom I was heading out. She didn't bother asking me where, she just studied the curtains, as the soft light of dawn crept across them and slipped in through the pores of the beige fabric before spilling onto the carpet. If I wasn't back by nightfall, she told me not to bother coming back at all.
5 and 7. This call came in at 1901. Advise a male and a female were arguing with each other near to the car dealership that's over there, the southeast corner. It's a white male, 50 years old, 6 foot, medium build. He has gray hair. He has jeans and he's riding a motorcycle. And then there's a white female, 5'4", medium build, thin.
Marco lived on the other side of town with his mother and father. It was his mother who came to the door. When I knocked, she was a 45-year-old Hispanic female with straight black hair and rose-colored lipstick. I'm here to speak with Marco. She raised an eyebrow and looked me up and down. We know each other from school. She continued to stare at me, as if she wasn't sure what she was looking at. Then she called out over her shoulder.
Marco, you have a visitor here for you.
Marco came to the door in a black t-shirt and a pair of shorts, the clothes I assumed he had slept in or at least tried to sleep in. The effects of exhaustion hung like barbells from his eyes, as he regarded me with muted disdain. I didn't comment on it, for I probably looked exhausted as well. He brought me to his room without saying anything. He lived in a small, cluttered space with metal band posters hanging on the walls and small gatherings of discarded clothes littering the ground. On the wall above his bed, hung with staples and thumbtacks, were a variety of pictures capturing him and his real friends. I observed all this from the doorway without stepping in. I didn't want to invade any more than I already did.
What do you want, Z?
Marco asked, not bothering to look at me. Work. We got the call. He deflated a little, as he let out a heavy breath and sank onto the edge of his bed. He put his head in his hands.
Don't tell me. Please, just don't.
We have our orders, Marco. The department has evidence placing the skinwalker within a stretch of woods a couple of miles out of town.
And they want us to what? Hunt it.
Lower your voice. Marco dug his fingers into his hair in some attempt to rip it out. He let go, breathed, and shook his head.
No, I can't do this anymore. I quit. I'm done.
He stood up, punctuating the manner. I didn't move.
Please, just go.
I stepped in silently and closed the door behind me. He was clearly upset, shaken, and showing small signs of post-traumatic stress. He just needed a small reminder of his obligation. This was for his own good. Marco, I believe you to be a smart individual, and I can see that you're upset. But slow down. Let's think things over before we decide to.
I'm not doing it.
Stop, okay? That is not the correct course of action. I'm advising you.
I fucking quit, Z.
Marco shrugged his shoulders.
It's over.
Lower your voice.
Why the hell should I listen to you? You fucking...
We have orders, Marco. We have made a commitment to protecting the safety of the public.
Safety? How many people are dead because of us? Because of you.
I said, lower your voice.
Now you want us to walk out into the woods on some fucking suicide mission.
Walking away from this is suicide, Marco. He went quiet then. Tears started to come to his eyes as the reality of the situation settled in. He slumped back onto his bed. You can't walk away. We know things. Marco didn't respond. You still have people here that care for you, Marco.
For now.
We parked the car next to a tucked-away trail leading into the forest and set off on foot, and with backpacks stashed with flashlights, extra ammunition, rain gear, and snacks, we abandoned paved concrete roads for dirt and twigs. I didn't know how long we were going to be out there, and the thought that we should have collected more supplies began to tug at my mind, along with the fear that I was going to be locked out of my home tonight. With a lack of structural design, the forest was a strange place for me. The thought of hunting something out there, as both of us trekked across foliage, life cracking under our feet, gave this job a sharper edge, and I could feel it pressed against my throat. Something fell over in the distance, tearing like rough paper. We had taken for granted the interior of the car, having spent so many hours in it. Now, we were outside, squeezing through a gap found in a soft wall of leaves and bramble, swaying limply, while the cicadas gave us away with their alarming cheer. And somewhere in that thicket of vegetation, the stinging snap of a branch, something had its eyes on us. "Keep your eyes out for any wildlife," I said, as we broke out into less dense foliage. I was taking point with my service weapon out in front of me, and armed with a 12 gauge he got from home, Marco followed close behind. He hadn't said anything since the car, no questions, no observations, no trivia about some random metal band, and it was the only time his silence became unwelcome, as it scratched at the back of my neck. Checking over my shoulder, I saw his barrel pointed towards the dirt. After an hour, we took our first break and sat against a fallen tree with a large gash on its side that almost split it in two, a sign that we were moving in the right direction. Marco gazed at the trunk, as he stuffed a granola bar in his mouth, grinding it away. Somewhere in the canopy above, something cried out with a pitiful yet sadistic pitch. I offered him my granola bar when he was done, for I wasn't hungry. And he regarded me with a brief glance before racking back the shotgun to check the chamber, and the slug nestled inside.
We should keep moving.
Another hour after that, we came upon a creek with water bouncing over smooth stones. Becoming murky, as it progressed at a slight decline, the muddy stream gleamed in the daylight which sporadically broke through the canopy, but as we followed along the edge, that copper tone changed into a shade of dark red. And with that acidic, familiar stench, I predicted the buzzing of flies, before I heard them. It was a little further down on the other side of the creek, behind a rock and a rotting log, that I saw a swarm of them dancing. That's where we found Sarah, identifiable only by her purple Converse sneakers. The rest of her, all she was composed of, was left as a bloody mural, one piece of redefined flesh stretched out from the greenery to the muddy water, which was carried off downstream. Paralyzed, Marco stared at it with a tense scrutiny, as if he was trying to parse out some semblance of her within every drop of blood, becoming one with nature. It was then, when he no longer knew what he was looking at, that his expression went limp and his stare dissociative. I didn't take a photo. I just couldn't. Marco twitched, his head lurched, and then he spun around and fell to his knees in the creek and begged, but nothing came out. I must have stared at the remains for too long, trying to piece Sarah back together. Her elongated screams echoed in my ear, and I made a noise, muffled and trapped in the back of my throat. I couldn't tell if it came from a need to cry or to retch something up. So, collapsing onto a nearby rock, I turned away from it all, towards the beaming green leaves hanging off of branches, each one serving as a home for tiny insects, where everything moved naturally. Then the wind blew through and twisted everything sideways, carrying with it the smell of rot and sour copper. And sitting in that muddy creek, after having nothing come of his dry heaving, Marco took a shuddering breath. Then, with the edge of a jagged blade, he bellowed at the world around him. The sun had begun its trek towards the horizon. When we reached a flat valley, Marco was trudging along in front this time, the shotgun loosely swinging by his side. The ground began to descend, and Marco stared out at the field, partially overshadowed by the bony silhouettes of the tree line in the distance. The trees, with the exception of a few degrading leaves, stood mostly dead, carrying a grey complexion, their thin wooden limbs stretched upward. And sitting behind the frame of their many pointed spires, unfurling against the backdrop of a putrid-colored sky, a plume of smoke drifted. A red sun stared through it, directly at us. Leaving behind the green scenery, we crossed the valley, and lying in wait on the opposite side, our target watched us from behind a veil of mangled branches. I was sure of this. As we traversed through the dry thicket, leaves crunching under our steps, there were sharp popping cracks of wood in the distance, all around us, and we could do nothing but watch our backs and keep moving towards the trail of smoke. It looked like a polluted rainbow. And near the end of it, the trees spread out, as we came upon an old fence covered in a flaky gray, powdered substance. Inspecting it, I scooped a little up onto my finger and rubbed it with my thumb. It was soft, giving off the stale odor of ash, as specks of it fluttered down to the soft gray soil below. Beyond this man-made border were a couple of small log cabins. They sat slanted, ashy, and warped with wooden planks drained of life, sapped from the surrounding environment. We passed in between them, keeping our eyes on the boarded windows, and came upon the corpse of a community, tortured, gutted, and left to die. More cabins in a similarly boarded up state of decay surrounded us in a circular formation, with caved-in roofs and charred foundations, and in the middle of it all was a large field with broken picnic tables sitting on dead, ash-covered grass. And at the center of that was the end of the rainbow, the gates of hell, the source of that burnt rubber smell. A bonfire stood with a mountain of ash at its base, sizzling with smoke, and buried within it, a set of stiff fingers stuck out, curled in a maniacal gesture like the crooked legs of a dead bug. Marco turned away from the scene, as he called out God's name, then involuntarily gagged. I backed away from it, weapon ready, with the steady fear that something in there would come to life and crawl out. My head swung on its axis, as I felt the weight of eyes crawling all over me. The shacks were completely abandoned with glimpses of their dark interiors between the gaps of boarded-up windows, and upon closer inspection, nothing inside could be seen, but I could have sworn hearing the quick hissing sweep of feet across dirty floors, the creaking of wood with a shift in weight. Whether or not this observation was true, I knew we were not alone. My first assessment took this place to be some sort of abandoned campground, but there weren't any signs or supplies indicating such, and I even spotted miniature crop fields meant to grow corn behind some of the shacks, but the stalks had turned brittle and withered, taking on the sour color of aging paper. And it was the sight of all this death that had caused Marco to crumble under the weight of his own anxiety. He hugged the shotgun close to his chest, while sitting in the grass, keeping his eyes on the tree line around us. I kept my service weapon by my side. This must be an Amish commune. Marco shook his head and nodded towards the biggest structure in the commune, which sat at the head of the field. In comparison with the huts surrounding it, the large log cabin gave off the royal demeanor of a castle with the outside home decor, and a radio antenna on the rose-colored roof, which sported a small satellite dish at the top with a red bulb perched above it, blinking. Guns drawn, we nudged the double set of doors open to find a living room arrangement, a couch, some lounge chairs, a coffee table. Standing in the doorway, the hinges squealing, as they rocked back and forth, we listened for a reaction to our entrance, an indication of presence. Then, off to the right, I picked up on whispers. I wished that I hadn't, but then they grew more frantic, sharper. Then Marco noticed. Our weapons shifted towards a door, half ajar, sitting right next to a staircase heading up to the second floor, and leaning against the adjacent wall. I could hear the desperate prayers of what sounded like an adult male, his words dripping with madness, as they spilled out of the doorway. For a moment, I was afraid of a possible contagion. Please deliver me. I do not belong here. Lend me strength, Lord, for I fear that I have been forsaken. Keep such horrors and thoughts from my mind. Give me sight, give me sight, give me sight. I'm lost. Marco convinced himself to take a few short breaths, if only to gather an ounce more courage. Through the crack in the door, a male covered in rags was kneeling, by himself, in front of a barren wall. I took a step in, immediately announcing my presence with the creak of a board. The man paused, for a brief moment, then continued, his prayers growing bolder, as we entered the room. Lord, please be merciful. I didn't know. They tricked me. I couldn't determine anything about him yet. I couldn't see his face.
Sir?
Marco said, stepping past me.
You alright?
Lord, give me strength. The man slowly shifted position, as if something had pulsated out of him. He grew still. Marco. He waved me off. The man shifted. I yanked Marco back by the collar as the man lunged toward us, warm light catching the blade of his knife, whistling through the air, while he swung it wildly, spitting curses and obscenities like a growling animal trapped in a corner. I gave myself enough space for a clear shot.
Stop.
Marco shifted his stance.
We need him.
He held the shotgun horizontal with a firm, trembling grip. The stranger, heaving out fleeting prayers with a raspy breath, pointed the knife at Marco, his eyes narrowing on the edge of the blade. Marco thrusted his body forward in a quick feint. The stranger thrust the knife forward, and with a quick jerk, Marco disarmed him with the butt of his weapon, knocking the blade to the side, letting it clink against the wooden floorboards. The man yelped and threw himself on Marco, but he was pushed back and pinned to the back wall with Marco's shotgun pressed against his neck. The pressure didn't stop him from howling like a banshee being dragged into hell. Despite Marco's reassurance that he was safe, he didn't stop. His eyes flew manically between the two of us, but they mainly rested on me. Pointing with an old finger, he cried,
Lord, I can see. I can see. It's here now. Save me.
I smashed the butt of my weapon across the top of his head, and then again. His screams were cut short, and he let out a pitiful whimper.
Where am I? Why have you forsaken me here?
We unloaded him onto the couch in the living room, a trickle of blood running from his forehead, his eyes misty and cloudy. Tears silently dripped from them across his grimy cheeks and into a beard full of feral hair. This man, I was sure, was born from the Dark Ages.
Hey, man. What's your name?
The man's gaze slowly fell from the ceiling. A void of despair sat where his eyes used to be.
Roland.
Okay, good, Roland. I'm...
No names. Roland flinched at the sound of my voice, observing me with an alarmed demeanor. I didn't break eye contact, forcing him to stare at his lap. Marco shot a quick glance of contempt at me as well.
Name is Marco. The walking robot over there is just here to take notes. But I'm going to ask you a few questions, alright?
Roland kept his eyes on his lap, his shoulders scrunched up.
What happened here?
He lifted his head back up and let out a shuddering moan.
Where am I?
You're in the woods.
Roland shook his head bitterly.
No more. My home is no more. I sold. No, I didn't know. They tricked me.
Roland stared out of the front door at the smoking bonfire sitting in the center of the field, the bird remains lying under it. He shrank into himself, shriveling up on the couch like a plant without sunlight or water. The hellish image seemed to have cut him deeply, bleeding the past from him, for he told us about the night, way back when the village heard screams coming from a house buried within the woods. It belonged to a female by the name of Rhea. Something was wrong with her husband.
She said Harold wasn't right. He wasn't himself, like there was a stranger in her bed. She wouldn't calm down, so we sent a group of men to check on him.
His lips trembled, and I could see the faint hint of an old memory cross his mind.
One of the men didn't return, Jonathan, and the rest that came back, hollering like dogs. They had set the house ablaze. You could see the firelight through the trees. And then we heard it. I thought it was Harold, until I saw the shape of it.
Most of the shacks outside were scarred by black burn marks. The worst of them had been completely consumed and barely resembled a shack at all.
There were wolves among us.
Roland whispered, more to himself.
You all some sort of Amish community or something?
The man shook his head.
We just wanted a new way of living. It's not much, but it was home.
Do you have a radio here, for the antenna? Roland nodded.
I wouldn't bother with it. Nothing is, as it seems no more. God's guidance has left us. No.
Ronald threw his head in his hands, hiding his face. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Lord, forgive me. The enemy surrounds me, fills my head with doubt. Leaving Marco to his rambling, I searched the rest of the house with my service weapon by my side. Late afternoon had arrived, turning the sky into a dimmed bulb on its last legs, and casting the burning shade of fire across what appeared to be an adolescent's bedroom. Female, with a small collection of painted wooden dolls. The radio was downstairs in a back room. It still ran, running off a generator out back supplied by a small shed stocked with gasoline. Outside, the rest of the village was quiet and thoroughly dead. I still wasn't sure, however, if there was anybody left in hiding besides Marco, me, and the mad pastor. But through the slits of one of those boarded-up windows, deep within the recesses of those huts, I thought I picked up on a shifting shadow. Besides that, no other signs of life, only the charred human remains at the base of the bonfire. Stephen Bargslow, the founder of Lakeside, came to mind. It was at this point that I gained the strong impulse to go home. I thought maybe, if I just walked off in the direction I came, through the dead thicket, the spanning valley, and past what remained of Sarah Benjamin, then maybe I could make it back home in time to hug JJ and tell my mother I was sorry. Sorry for what, exactly? Well, the details wouldn't really matter. I smelt smoke again, but it was more potent, more corrupt than before, like cursed oil. To my right, east through the screen of bark and branches, there was the distant, faint glow of a fire, accompanied by a low moan. I had no real intention of heading towards the source, but it wouldn't have been over until our target, the skinwalker, was terminated. Just imagine, I told myself, if JJ went wandering into the woods one day. This was the job. I dropped my backpack off at the front door. Marco and I said nothing to each other. Walking off into the woods, I took nothing but my service weapon and camera. The guiding light of the fire became more visible, as it got darker, with the lone moan pulling me forward, as the details in my peripheral became obscured. Stepping over raw dirt, I became fully detached in that dim space, and with the sun dipping below the horizon, it was set that there was no home left for me in this world. Lakeside, where Mary's was open from 9 to 3 a.m. and JJ would wait for me with a slice of pie that Tina had wrapped, and where thousands of cataloged faces exist within the halls of Lakeside High, faces I knew as well as one knows a stuffed animal. Past its borders were plains of grass, rows of corn tended by farmers with values of family, and then the dense wilderness, where interlopers stalk the edges of backwaters and valleys. That's where you'll find me. I stopped and leaned on a tree to catch my breath, for I had never been so alone. I slowed down to not give away my presence and took cover behind a fallen log. About 30 feet ahead of me, a bonfire roared. Through the blinds of skinny dead pines, I watched the silhouettes of entities break free of their human forms to dance in rotation around the light like one of those zoetropes, morphed by fire. I perched my camera on the log, biting down on my thumb to stop it from shaking. And through the lens, a devil seemed to spawn from the flames, composed of bones fastened together with charred rope. On top of this statue sat an elk skull with a crown of horns twisting up into the sky. It appeared to be some sort of worship ritual. I've read reports of doppelgangers, in some cases, mimicking aspects of worship to conform to a more spiritual environment, but they've never been known to do it on their own. The object of worship being the target also posed more questions regarding entities' interactions with each other, especially in terms of power dynamics. Do all doppelgangers worship this entity? Is there some sort of hierarchical power structure we don't know about? Such questions poked me with a dose of dread, as they implied a level of organization, giving them the possible credibility of a united front. The assumption had always been that entities acted alone like wild predators. I snapped a photo for evidence, giving off a minute audible click. They stopped, then turned to look at me. It was fully dark by the time I stumbled my way back to the commune. I burst through the front door of the cabin and ducked with my hands raised, as Marco pointed his service weapon at me. He shuddered.
Fuck, Z.
Roland was cowering behind the sofa, glaring at me with wild suspicion, as I crumpled onto the floor. Sweat and leaves stuck to my face. I pulled myself up and shut the door, locked it, then immediately went to barricade it with a nearby dresser. They're coming. Lock everything and stay quiet. We're not safe here. There were 2 door entries into the cabin, with one in the front and back of the residence, both barricaded with heavy furniture. Most of the windows in the house were boarded up with nailed wooden planks, flimsy, but I estimated they would hold. The only exception was a window looking out onto the porch on the bottom floor. It was in a side room to the right of the living area. I took position beside it, service weapon in hand. Marco took the living room, positioning himself behind a barricade made of rearranged furniture, while Roland hugged himself at the base of the stairway, whispering little prayers to himself. It wasn't long before I heard the crunch of dead grass outside, the steps becoming louder, as its source came around to the front of the house and took a sharp, creaking step up onto the porch. It went silent then. I peeked over the window sill to get a proper view of them, but nothing was visible. I kept my ears open for another indication of presence, hearing Roland's hushed prayers in the background, then a knock. I flinched and held still. Quietly, I moved to the other half of the room and trained my service weapon on the front door, making sure to shut my mouth, because my breathing grew heavy. Then I waited. There was the hollow clunk of another footstep against wood, trailing off into a smooth silence. Then I heard a voice, high-pitched and hushed. Do you see it? No, not yet. Another voice, one male and female, both filled with wondrous curiosity and innocence. Neither could have been older than 7 years old.
Z.
Marco said with a sharp whisper.
Who the fuck is that?
Be quiet. There it is. Where? They were closer now, too close. My vision grew strained, as I scanned the dark to find them. Look, it's right there. Beyond the window, 2 pairs of eyes, faintly glowing, stared at me before slinking away out of sight. I jumped up, slipped out of the room, and pinned myself to the edge of the doorway with my service weapon clutched to my chest, my heart beating against it to escape to somewhere more secure.
Z.
I heard Marco quickly stand up, but I couldn't see him. It's me. Don't shoot. I tilted to get a glimpse of the window, my service weapon at the ready, but the entities were gone. Signaling to Marco, I shuffled past Roland, who had wrapped himself around the railing, and felt my way around the crafted barricade to join Marco.
Just get the fucking flashlight out.
No. No lights. He clicked his tongue.
You gonna tell me what that was?
There were 2 out on the front porch, maybe. Roland, shut it. A guttural sob had spilled out of him. It was a small but prominent enough noise to draw attention. I almost shot up to get control of him, when Marco stopped me.
Listen.
Outside, somewhere in the dark, the excited cries of children emanated, like the ones I'd hear whenever I dropped JJ off at school or visited the park. Its presence there paralyzed my nerves, and Marco and I sat there, as those cries slowly metamorphosed into a moaning bawl that reached a fever pitch, when Roland was evoked to unleash a wail that shook the windows. We both covered our ears and waited for the audible storm to be over when a screeching roar blew it all away. A slight vibration pulsed through the foundation of the log cabin, as something moved outside, creaking and whining like a falling tree. Then it spoke. Its speech was garbled and animalistic, with a feminine tone becoming lost within the cry of an elk. I didn't connect the dots until Marco let out a short cry, cutting it off with his palm, as Sarah's voice called out from the night.
Billy,
The voice faded, as the target stomped away into the dense wilderness crawling with interlopers, leaving us all alone in that cave with Ronald's frantic murmurs and Marco's muffled sobs.